Hello, and welcome to yet another installment of the 2020 Virtual National Science Festival. I am Siaka Kolisi, a facilitator for this session. Sci-Fest Africa is celebrating 24 years of existence, but unfortunately, we could not host a physical event due to COVID-19 with its rules and regulations. And on that note, I hope everyone's staying safe at home by practicing social distancing, wearing a mask, and sanitizing. Sci-Fest Africa has embarked on a 6-month journey where we will be delivering meticulously packaged quality content on our various online platforms. Our overarching theme, Take Root Nurture, is in accordance with the International Year of Plant Health, as declared by the United Nations. Well, let's have a recap. In October, we were celebrating the sub-theme of astronomy. And in November, we looked at climate change. And now we're in December, and we are celebrating the sub-theme of agriculture. And today, we're going to be discussing a very important, very essential, but sometimes overlooked topic, which is the rise of small-scale farmers in the agricultural industry of South Africa. And with me, I have 3 guests. Our first guest is Mr. Roger Takoldu, who is responsible for smallholder development within the Department of Agriculture, Land Reform, and Rural Development. He reports into food security, which is a key pillar within the branch of food security and agrarian reform. In his role of smallholder development, he aims to improve on the production systems and development support of smallholder producers in the agriculture, land reform, and rural development sectors towards food security for all. Well, to ensure food security for all, strategic leadership has to be provided in the design, implementation, and management of policy processes for smallholder producer support to ensure sustainability. He also provides national leadership and support to all provinces constituting smallholder development towards the achievement of targets, and overseeing functioning of the departmental committees for food security. He is a qualified horticulturalist and extensionist. He has, during this period, built a track record in design and coordinating programs within the government, the South African Biodiversity Institute, and other organizations that are involved in the development and management of agricultural, horticultural programs, land reform, and other economic programs. Our second guest is Mr. Andile Sipesihle Ngobo, last but not least, we have Wanga Kakaza, who is an operation manager of AgriBiotech, a non-profit company, and managing director of Wanga's Juice. AgriBiotech is a non-profit company which was established to nurture, mentor, train, and incubate agripreneurs in the value-adding to biological resource space. Wanga's Juice is an agro-processing company focusing on processing fruit, vegetable, and other agricultural products. He holds a Bachelor of Agricultural Extension / Production and honors in Agricultural Extension from the University of Fort Hare. He is committed to assisting upcoming agripreneurs to overcome their day-to-day challenges that they are facing with their business operations. Well, firstly, we will have a round of presentations from all the panelists. followed by an interactive Q&A session, which will engage our audience watching from home or the office. If you're watching from Zoom, please use the Q&A function. And if you're streaming from Facebook, spam the comment section. I will now hand over to our first panelist, which is Mr. Takotu, who will give us a short presentation, followed by Mr. Ngobo, and then Mr. Wanga Kakaza will go last. Take it away, Mr. Roger Takotu.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everybody. Hope everybody's doing well, keeping safe, practicing social distancing. As a public servant, I would like to advise you that we're still in the state of the national state of disaster under the COVID protocols. Thank you for this opportunity. Secondly, to be part of this discussion, to be a panelist in this discussion, in this science festival. So yes, the brief was for how the department sees the rise of small-scale farmers in South Africa. You can just go to the next slide. Ryan, you can just go to the next slide. Thanks. So at a glance, this is how land, agriculture, and the food economy looks in South Africa. And what this tells you, I know it's quite a bit of a busy slide, but what I've done is I've taken out 10 of the most used commodities in our country, and just put it over there and see what is the employment or the average employment from 2019 to 2015. Sorry, I just put the dates around backward over there. What is the production in terms of the value, and then what is the share of black farmers, especially black farmers or small scale farmers in the country at the moment. So you can see that in terms of maize, black farmers only has a share of 4.7%. Soybeans and our black population, which is the bulk of our, is actually the biggest consumer of maize. Soybeans, about 3.1%, wheat, 1.3%, cotton, 2.4%, citrus, 12%, deciduous fruit, viticulture, and the list goes on. I think wool is the biggest, and then cattle at 34%. What then, just below that table, it gives you what is the poverty line. As colleagues have heard in the opening introduction of myself, I do work in food security. And so what I'm also showing there is the poverty indicators, the lower poverty line, the food security poverty line, and then the upper bound poverty line. And then between 2016 and 2017, what has generally happened in terms of the poverty line, and how the percentage decrease in those groups has actually affected and has been affected. Further on in terms of the slide, just slightly in the middle to your right, we look at production from 1994 to 2018, and then the growth in terms of maize, oranges, beef, and potatoes. So as a country, we produce loads and loads of maize in a normal year, roughly between 13 million tons in very exceptional years, 14 to 16 million tons, just over 16 million tons. So you can see there the average in terms of maize. And in 1994, we were only producing just under 5 million, 4.8 million tons. 2018, we were doing about 13.1 million. So there was 169% growth. Oranges, the same. Citrus, which oranges form part of, is actually the biggest export body that South Africa exports out of the country. Beef, we've moved up from 500 tons to about 1 million tons. So there was 100% fold increase. The same with potatoes. In terms of imports, I'm just showing you what in terms of imports, what is the growth been in terms of imports So we had over 1,000% increase in terms of imports. So procurement of exports, we had a relatively good and the process, I'm talking about processed goods leaving the country. Unprocessed goods has been, luckily has been and has been slightly lower than processed, because that would processed versus unprocessed would be better. So what are the indicators that we have to look at? And what I'm showing you on the far right of your screen is the share in gross value production in terms of field crops, which contributes about 23% to the gross production value. Horticulture, which is mainly your fruits, etc., which is 24%, and livestock 53%. At the bottom right, I'm just showing in terms of agriculture and agro-processing, what in terms of just field crops in broad sense, the turnover and the share in terms of GDP. Now, very important question. Next slide, please, Ryan. Next slide is, when I showed you the first slide at a glance, what am I talking about? These increases that has happened, because a lot can be contributed to the commercial sector, but there's a big sense that the small scale sector contributes a lot, and that they're not necessarily being recorded as such. But the rise of small scale farmers in South Africa. So what is it? Firstly, I had to put down, this is a couple of questions as I was doing the presentation. I had to ask, in South Africa, we use a lot of words to describe farmers, producers. As a government, there was no standardized term of how do we group farmers. Yes, you got commercial farmers, you've got subsistence farmers, and you got smallholder farmers. And we've actually been busy with a concerted effort to group those farmers. So there's a draft national policy on comprehensive development support. Oh, support is spelled wrong. My apologies. That needs to come out, because previously farmers used to be called even in this forum, we are still calling it small scale farmers. What is a small scale? Is it small scale in terms of production? Is it small scale in terms of land size? Is it small scale in terms of turnover? So we grouping farmers in such a way that it loses the essence on how we need to be supporting, or how this farmer group actually needs to, and which farmer group in the small scale that I've just spoken about needs to rise up. Then who's involved? Necessarily, government needs to be all three spheres of government, being national, provincial, and local municipality, because that is how our country is framed as a democracy. Business, commercial as well as emerging businesses, and then labor and other interest groups, because in the agricultural space, we do have quite a bit of formations. We have organized black and white agriculture, and that needs to be recognized, as well as labor. The agricultural labor space is also quite involved, so we need to give them that recognition. So the rise of small scale farmers in South Africa, how is it different? One, it's a new class farmer. It's a totally new class farmer of what was there 20 years ago. We are also looking at new types of agripreneurs, because agriculture in a sense is not only primary production, it is also the full value chain. So you have certain producers which they do production at, or farmers at a production level, but you have others that also do value adding and changing of a product from one form to another. And so you need to create the space for those agripreneurs as well. It's a new rural middle class to drive mass production, industrialization and consumption. Because if you do not have industrialization to drive this, the rise of small scale farmers will inevitably be in vain. Who will benefit? New farmers and jobs. From an agricultural perspective, our big picture is over 317,000 jobs, extension officers, more skilled personnel in the agricultural space, agripreneurs across the value chain, about 63,000 of them, better households, and then of course we know our dynamic, especially because we're in Africa, a bias towards women and a bias towards youth, because the youth make up quite a large percentage of our population. Where's the funding? The funding is not only in government. It's a public-private partnership. Everybody needs to contribute. We need to blend funds, where you're taking government money plus private equity and statutory levies and trusts. And actually, how do you bring that small-scale farmer or that smallholder farmer into that space? Which regions? Of course, we will look at priority commodities, corridors, building on commercial areas with a focus on communal and state land, because we know our spatial development previously in our country. But yes, that lends us enough competitive advantage to develop those timelines. Yes, key still focus is still the National Development Plan. Next slide. This is just the theory of change. The theory of change, in terms of that rise of the small scale farmer in South Africa. So South Africa, in terms of the problem on the left hand side, South Africa is in a middle income trap due to low growth, high poverty, inequality, non-inclusive agricultural value chains, as well as a very lean domestic market, caused by non-existence of a rural middle class. So you have the extremes. You have the wealthy, and then you have the poor, and you have a very small middle class in between. The theory of change says that a coexistence of commercial and smallholder producers and agribusiness, creating a middle class through mass production, processing of marketing of products to lift the average rural household income. And that is where the rise of the small scale farmer will be extremely important. The approach basically being inclusive at the district level, looking at commodities. The goal is the growth in the economy, employment through investment, and a high potential and marginalized areas. And then basically the impact or the outcomes of what we're looking for is food security, job creation, the reduction in inequality, as well as foreign earnings. Something very important, especially to this rise of the small scale farmer, we have dependencies and enablers. You're looking at policy and legislation, you're looking at land and water, and we know what the current dispensation is, especially on land in our country. Water being another very hot topic, because we also have to take note that South Africa is a water scarce country. Affordable finance, which is especially for the small scale and black sectors, that is a real challenge. Affordable finance, not free money, but cheap money, and there's a distinct difference between the two. Markets and standards, that is a very critical aspect, especially if we are looking to earn foreign currency, as well as markets in general. South African market standards, we're looking even at food safety, hard infrastructure, that we're talking about water, fresh produce, storage, processing, dipping, ports, rail, all of those things, soft infrastructure, and then safety and climate risk. We need to understand that the rise of the smallholder will impact on the climate, and the climate, we need to take note of all these impacts of the climate. The delivery models. So these are ideas and plans that to the rise of the small scale farmer that we need to take note. You need to look at production schemes and where South Africa has the biggest competitive advantage. And of course, the last one, looking at industrial crop, is cannabis, which grows naturally in South Africa. And I think we can harvest a lot upon that. Next slide. So this is just something that we've been working on in smallholder development and in the department. What is the if we look at the rise of the smallholder or small scale farmer, and how do we move forward, the estimated potential impact. So this just takes some of the production areas, looking at industrial crops. If we look at cotton, which South Africa has a competitive advantage of, because with cotton, it can grow in poorer soils. South Africa produces a lot of sugarcane. We can see the new hectares. What is the potential jobs that can come out of it? What's the extra output in terms of tonnage from this? And then the last slide is the additional rand value that it can add to the GDP of the country. You're looking at poultry and pigs, red meat. You're looking at the grains, fruits, and vegetables. So in total, you're looking at quite a lot of billions, that just over about 200 billion that could be added additional to the GDP. And the impact in that is huge. But where is this going to come from? So this needs to come from the smallholder or the small scale farmer to be part of the system. And their rise, I mean, adding 200 billion, the rise of the small scale could actually, if you take over 200 billion rand that they could add to the GDP, that will add quite a bit to the outlook of our country. Next slide, please. Some of the issues, I actually work with a team, and when in discussing this with them, and while we were looking at it, initially I didn't want to put in the slide, but they said no, let's put in the slide and show what is the things that will hamper the rise of the small scale farmer in South Africa. What creates the enabling environment? So I'm not sure if everybody, but I know in the last couple of weeks, the department has put forward to Parliament the land donations policy, especially how do private people donate land. And we knowing, and people are always talking about policy certainty in terms of the land space, and the things that is happening around it. So that will give clarity. So we'll be busy with, and for the national department where I'm sitting at, we are a lot concerned with the policy framework, because the policy framework enables a lot to happen. So clarity on private companies and citizens in terms of land reform, the beneficiary selection and land allocation, which was introduced into Parliament, and we actually got final clarity on that. How do we choose beneficiaries, and how do we allocate land to them? Especially the transparency on land beneficiary selection. What we're also doing in the department, even going down this morning, I was in a meeting with the planning department, or the planning section of our department, on how we're going to review the Marketing of Agricultural Products Act. And that is a very important act, especially for how best do we look at the existing national fresh produce markets that we do have. What do we bring on board? What other parts of the act do we need to bring in to strengthen the rise, or to bring small scale and smallholder farmers into that space so that we can industrialize? There's the revising of the Property Valuation Act, developing regulations for foreign land ownership. I think the moderator for this section even spoke about this, plant health. We're introducing a plant health or phytosanitary bill introduced to Parliament now it was to improve biosecurity and market access. I think he was talking about plant health, and it is the year of 2020 is the year of International Year of Plant Health, and that is very important for a country that produces a lot of fruit. We know we've got significant stuff like fruit fly. We've been hit hard by maybe not because this is specifically plant health. If you're talking about maize farmers, you're talking about what is this thing? We introduced WEMA, but this disease that we got from Brazil, it attacks maize, and it killed off quite a lot of maize. I just can't get to the name, forgive me. So those are things. Other things in terms of biosecurity that the department is also looking at. We know we've got a recent spate of brucellosis in the animal sector, and we've had many other diseases within the space. The Agricultural Produce Agency's Amendment Bill. How best do we improve in terms of the amendment bill for the produce agencies at the national markets and other places. The agricultural products and standards amendment bill introduced into parliament, which also improves biosecurity. But those talks to specifically, those are the forerunners for your gap. Good agricultural products. We know if you export, you need global gap or Tesco's or Nature's something else. In South Africa, there are other companies that use other things, but as a government, we only promote, and we're talking about SA Gap, so the South African Good Agricultural Products program. The Preservation and Development of Agricultural Land Framework, PIDALFA. This, I know this has caused, this week alone has caused quite a bit of in the media as well, but we have introduced a bill where we want to preserve agricultural land. If you look at Gauteng, where I sit, I felt, yeah, nobody's actually supposed to be living in Gauteng because this is the best soil to grow maize. If you look at Mpumalanga, a lot of mining activity happens in Mpumalanga, but you have a lot of open cost mining happening there. So the best soils has also the best things underneath the soil or below the surface. In the upgrade of the Land Tenure Rights Amendment Bill, which was also introduced into Parliament. I'm not far from finished. Can we have next slide? This slide is just the rapid release of land, and then I wanted to show you that you can actually bring the map also up, Ryan, if you want to. So Dalrad has acquired approximately about 8.7 million hectares through 3 pillars of land reform program. And we've sampled about 1.8 million hectares for that as for this. So about 87% of the land that is under state control is without water rights, and a lot of them are in Limpopo, Mpumalanga, and Northern Cape. And then over 90% of these transferred lands has no water rights. About 75% is commercially viable, and 81% is suitable for livestock, with about 12.4% available for food crops, and then 4.5% for horticulture. And this is just showing how best, according to the provinces, how best we can actually, in terms of land, impact on that rise. Next slide, please. What we also need to do in terms of the rise and how do we affect this rise, we need to know clearly as a country, we need to do mapping. So current potential of production, taking the place where it is. We need to know the land capability, the soil types, because you cannot ask somebody to do lychees in Gauteng, because lychees in Gauteng will not work. I'm just using that as an example. Climate change, infrastructure, what infrastructure is there? We need to markets and consumption patterns, diseases and pests, and how do they move across the country? And so this slide is all about how we best map them. But the department has also taken into consideration what are the corridors, or what are the things that if we target them, where do we have competitive advantage? I think very few people know this, that 60% of the world's wool actually comes from South Africa, and it comes from a household level, mainly KZN, Eastern Cape. A lot of infrastructure has been put in by government to produce it, and it's very strange, and a lot of people know that, but actually the production actually happens at the household level, not at a commercial agriculture level, but at the household level. The same with mohair. Mohair is also, I think, it's higher. It's 85% of the world's production of mohair actually comes from South Africa. So that is the competitive advantage. So what is the infrastructure? What is the things that we need to put in place for that expansion and for the rise of smallholders? How do we fit that in that sector? Next slide, please. Critical to this rise, we'll need skilled people in the country. And you're looking at extension personnel. Currently, we have about 2,500, 2,400 extension officers in the country. That gives us a current ratio of for one extension officer, you have 1,000 farmers. And we actually need to get that down to 1:500. Or closer to 1:500, 1:2. So we need to put about 10,000 skilled agricultural practitioners into the space. And that is a different skill set across the value chain, looking from agribusiness, mechanization, production, plant and animal production, and in the soil part. So this rise, as this rise happens, we need to make sure that we have the skilled personnel to ensure everything happens in the sector and to make sure that the sector is actually taken care of. Next slide. So as you're talking about this rise, we need to, what we've done as a department, we are taking note of in terms of agricultural infrastructure. What currently is there and what is it that we need to bring on board, especially if we're going to talk about the rise of the small scale sector, the black small scale sector. We need to take note of service centers, irrigation schemes, storage facilities. Strangely enough, in South Africa, we do not have any grain storage facilities on the coast. So KZN, Eastern Cape, Northern Cape, you do not have any grain storage facilities for those areas. And those are the former TPVC states as such. So that is something that we need to take, and a lot of production of grains happen in those areas. Fresh produce markets, we need to see what we have. Is it enough? Do we need to, because we don't also want to create white elephants, abattoirs, mills, processing facilities, the enhancement of agriculture colleges, and what are the niches and how best do we bring out the niches. Then something else that we've been toying with is the rail branch lines or the rail branch networks in South Africa, because it would take some pressure off of our road network. And previously, in the old dispensation, we used to have a very good functioning rail network, and I think that's something that we need to consider as well, especially if we want to bring more small scale farmers on board. Next slide. I think I'm not far from finish. Lastly, I think this is my second last slide. When you're focusing on small and medium enterprises, particularly black supplies, there are short-term deliveries as well as barriers to entry. And then we need to do capacity building, create a more competitive, inclusive and diverse food system. So in terms of agro processing, what is the focus area? The increase of raw materials and import substitution of food and strategic agricultural products. When you talk about the rise, the more small scale and black farmers you have in the sector or in the value chain, the less you have to import. So the possible strategic reforms, we need production schemes that will counteract importing more things. Removing barriers to entry, concentration and behavior on dominant players. This is a very touchy subject. It's a very touchy one because we have big players when we have dominance and people pushing their dominance. And that is more, so we have to continue opening up the retail spaces, removing exclusive leases, rental spaces, large supplies to ensure there's quite a bit that we need to do, especially from a policy framework in terms of that. We need to have a new buyer power. Our rural spaces and our peri-urban spaces or township spaces, that is where the buying power of the country is. And so we need to tap into that. Supplier development and empowerment programs, I think quite a lot is in them. And then lastly, strengthening localization and procurement. We need to localize production. I know in KZN and Limpopo, you have huge or you still have growing of amadumbe, a leafy vegetable, but that localized product is not consumed. But yet you can come to any woods in the city and you can buy amadumbe at 80 rand a kilogram. So those are the things that we're talking about. And then we, of course, we need to buy local, as I said, and then leverage on what we have as the African Free Trade Agreement. How best do we move our products into Africa? How best do we harness that with the free trade agreement that we have now in place? And how does that local market, how does it become enticing to the rural middle class? My last slide. I think this is just a graphic of representation of when I'm talking about localization. Um, how when you reimagine something like a Maize Corridor. So here we've this is a 2D 3D picture of mainly 2D of the area in the northwest, in terms of maize production. So you have, how do we envisage bringing on an area like Wesselsbron? And this area that you have here is mainly a rural area. So from the one end you have input supplies, and the other hand you have production. And this slide actually tells you, in the area between Wesselsbron, Vryburg, how do you move stuff into Johannesburg, into the rail network? How do you move it into the shelf? You can create. So this is just at a very localized level, as you can see over here. So the hectareage that we're looking at in the area like this is 4,000 or 400,000 hectares. You're looking at the average yield ton of 3.5 tons per hectare. The new tons that can come out of this area is roughly about 4.7 million tons. And then the jobs that create is, and we're talking about permanent and seasonal jobs. You're looking at over 23,000 jobs that can be done in an area like this. I think this may look very weird to people, but if you look at in the rural spaces where you are between Tahong, Wesselsbron, Vryburg, just outside of Mafeking, that is a huge area that and a huge setup that we haven't tapped to. So when we talk about the rise of small scale farmers, this is a visual representation of how I think it needs to happen. Ladies and gentlemen, this is my last slide, and I thank you. Back to you, Mr. Chairperson.
Wow, what a wonderful and very informing presentation, sir. So before I hand over to our second speaker, I have just two quick questions for you. So, one, do you believe that agriculture is an effective tool to address things like poverty and unemployment, as well as inequality? And the second question, poverty headcounts in rural areas are significantly higher than that of urban areas. So how do you plan on addressing these issues? Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Moderator, for that two questions. Yes. So your first question is on poverty, and is agriculture a barrier, or not a barrier? Could it be a help? Yes. Um, no matter what you do in society, no society, no economy, nothing can thrive without agriculture. If you don't have food to eat, you'll have problems in your country. You will have serious problems. So yes, agriculture is one of the key critical pillars or foundations that you need in society, um, to drive out poverty and inequality. Because if people have enough food to eat, yes, if he can produce for himself, that's good. The second part of it, if he can then start creating economics by selling his surplus or trading his surplus, that already starts producing already economic wealth. And I'm using that term loosely now at the moment. In terms of inequality, inequality, it's an evil outside of agriculture, because inequality talks to an economic system. So if you look at some of your other countries in the world, they do not have systems where people are unequal. Everybody, no matter your qualification or your standing in life, you are equal. So some of of the older systems in the world, that Thomas Sankara has promoted, or Che Guevara, or some of these other well-known people, in their societies, you didn't have real equality because it was not based on a capitalistic system. So, but inequality it's an evil that we cannot get get rid of, as it seems, as South Africans. And I'm not sure if you know that our Gini coefficient means that the recent studies on our Gini coefficient says actually that South Africa's one of the most unequal societies in South Africa. Case in point, you have Sandton on the one side of the road. Just on the other side of the road, you have Alexander. And it's just a road separating inequality. And yes, there's other factors that plays a part in terms of inequality. In terms of poverty headcounts, yes. So there's a lot at South Africa that we actually do in terms of headcounts. So firstly, through the national census that happens once every 11 years. So we have a very fairly big understanding of what is the poverty headcount. And then what happens in between the census is something that we call the general household survey. So Department of Agriculture, or my chief directorate, food security, we work very close with Stats SA. So what we do is something called the general household survey. So we sample in between the census to see is there increase or decrease in terms of poverty headcounts. And then something of late that we have done as part of agriculture, we've introduced the Department of Agriculture and this chief director of food security through the subsistence farm directorate. We are having what you call a SAVAC. So SAVAC stands for South African Vulnerability Assessment Committee. So we are having vulnerability assessments that we are going to do. So just to better define the poverty headcount, we have started. We have done some work through the help of the SADC, and they've actually paid for the first couple of studies. And then my other colleague Tulilit Lamini works very much in terms of that. But what is strange is that poverty and the poverty headcount. So yes, we know we have about 16.1 million people that are food insecure and vulnerable. So not everybody. So of that 16.1 million people, we know about between 7 and 8 million people are definitely food insecure. That is people that has no access to food or very dire access to food, very little to it. And poverty and poverty headcounts, they don't take provincial boundaries in conjunction. It's actually when you see the patterns and the trends, it's something. But I can talk for hours on this, but let me stop there for now.
Thank you so much, Mr. Takodu. I will now hand over to the next speaker, Mr. Andile Ngobo. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you can hear me clearly. Thank you very much for allowing me to be a part of the discussion this afternoon. Thanks especially to the SciFest Africa guys. This particular presentation before you is one that speaks mostly to what I do, first of all. Obviously, it's going to be quite narrowed down to my province, being KwaZulu-Natal, as well as the city of Pietermaritzburg more specifically. And initially, the presentation itself spoke more to the youth, because I often address a lot of the youth groups, in university, some of the guys that I mentor that are coming into the farming space who are under 30 like myself, and who are often looking for some sort of guidance into the industry. But Ryan, if you go to the first slide. So, a lot of my slides are obviously just going to have some sort of like words or phrases, because I like to talk around the topics more than to have the focus being on reading the content, But basically, there's quite a lot of media influence around the food that we consume today. A lot of what is shown on television, things like fast food, become the new cool and in thing, and we gravitate towards remembering a lot of the products that we consume based on the things we've seen, the convenience. And also a lot of the food production in our country is also influenced heavily by obviously government and policy. This is more related to things like what we can actually what actually comes through our borders in terms of commodities that we buy, alternatives that are cheaper to what is available within our country, which obviously influences a lot of our buyers to want to spend more on the cheaper goods and less on what would be more expensive that is produced locally. And then there's also quite a lot of dependency that has been created around buying, and this is in the sense of convenience stores, retail. A lot of people having busy jobs, busy lives, busy lifestyles, being in the city, have moved away from producing their own food in terms of what they consume daily, the easy things like vegetables in their back garden, and have depended more now on buying and purchasing food from a local store in a central place. All of it obviously not being all that bad, because some circumstances require quite a bit of assistance in a sense. Some of the products that do come through the border that are cheap alternatives sometimes fill a gap where there has been a shortage in supply and quite a high demand for certain products that just can't come from local production. Next slide, please, Ryan. But there's one thing that I've recognized regarding a lot of people that I interact with, especially people in the professional space, and a lot of the young people, is that quite a lot of people are always surprised when they've taken a tour of the farm, and just when they really start to understand the process of where their food comes from. Obviously, where we choose to farm is influenced heavily by the following bullet points. These are the boxes to tick when you are assessing or looking at what kind of commodities or products that can be produced on a particular piece of land. Farming is quite region specific in South Africa. Hence, you find a lot of the deciduous fruit being more in the Western Cape than Northern Cape. You find a lot of dairy being in KwaZulu-Natal, a lot of the grain in Mpumalanga, Free State, and Gauteng. It all comes down to, obviously, because the climate conditions are different in each of these different areas. So some are conducive more to the extensive kind of agriculture, and some of them would be more for niche related products. Obviously, the scale of farming, the amount of land that is obviously available, in terms of hectares, as well as market access, where are most of these goods consumed, and is there access to being able to deliver these products to the market, and obviously sustainability as well. A lot of the time, people forget that in order for a piece of land or a farm to obviously continue to produce for many years to come, there's some level of sustainability that comes into it, which obviously speaks to how well you look after your environment, how well you look after your water sources, especially how well you take care of your soils. It's not just about bombing fertilizer or on your soils just to get your plant vigor all the time, but it also speaks to how you actually take care of your soils, how you rest your soils, how you replenish your soils with nutrients that you would have obviously taken away from the soil. Next slide, please, Ryan. So basically, my day-to-day job encompasses quite a lot of my portfolio, in the sense that my primary job is obviously managing Dusobuhle farming in Pietermaritzburg. It's a 1,299 hectare farm, and it has 300 hectares of sugarcane, about 100 head of nguni stud animals. We have a small herd of commercial beef master cattle. We have 130 meat master stud sheep as well. And then a lot of it is just characterized by natural grazing. And then my personal favorite part of the operation is the 30 hectares of vegetable production. Imbeer Agricultural Enterprise was then established 2 years after my management of the farm, which is an extensive project up in northern KwaZulu-Natal, where it's a 200 hectare farm that is intended to do groundnuts and maize, but is currently planted under 50 hectares of maize at the moment. Dela Farming is a 30 hectare vegetable farm in Weenan in KZN as well, which basically just replicates the 30 hectare portion that we currently run at Kusuguse Farm. Seasonal vegetables there as well, butternut cabbage, red cabbage, broccoli, cauliflower. And then NAM Food Production is a small little project in the heart of the Midlands, in Nottingham Road, where we keep 60 plus Guinea Merino sheep for shearing for wool, and small 20 hectare butternut plantation. And then Valley African Consulting is just the portfolio that I use to call the advisory part of my work that I do with helping small scale farmers and people who are just coming, young people who are coming into the industry who often just want help to be pointed into the right direction. Next slide, please. So I often look at growth in the industry for small scale farmers in sort of this format, the supply channels and farming. I believe that everybody who comes in obviously comes in with wanting to sort of see if the industry is actually for them. So often we all come in and start off by establishing our businesses and supplying the informal markets. We then go onto the wholesale market and then eventually aim for the retail market. And then eventually the goal, I think, for any business in general would obviously be to trade outside of the borders of not only our cities, but our provinces, but I think our country as a whole. Obviously, this speaks a lot to various things, sort of like when you talk informal markets, you talk just, income streams or the turnover or your cash flow basically is dependent on the number of customers that you're able to interact with on a day-to-day basis. So you might have 5 people coming onto the farm to buy your produce, you might have 10, you might have 15, some days you might have none. With the wholesale market, it becomes a little bit more structured because you now start dealing with from business to business. You're now supplying in bulk. You're now obviously sending invoices, and you're getting your income on a slightly more steady or larger amounts, but it's not as steady, any more steady than your informal markets, simply because people still decide whether they're going to fish the produce or not, whether you can deliver or not, and they will always negotiate the price. Then we have the retail market space, which is obviously a whole lot better in terms of the consistency of income or revenue in a sense, because you are now dealing with business to business, but on a more structured level. When you're on a more structured level, you're obviously dealing with a little bit more stability. And then the international market, I think everybody doesn't actually want to get paid in rands. I think people would much rather prefer to be getting their income in dollars or pounds. Next slide. So this is just an example of what the informal market that I'm talking about really is all about. People coming in their buggies to pick up produce on the farm. When we produce 30,000 cabbages on a hectare, that grows over 90 days, you would have people who generally come onto the farm to buy, and they'd want to sell to hawkers on the side of the streets. And then we have something called a municipal market in our province, in our province in KZN, where in the major cities have a marketplace where farmers are able to sort of, now we call it dumping really, but you supply your produce to an agent who's there to sell your produce for you on your behalf at a 12.5% commission. Obviously, that becomes a bit problematic because whenever you supply or you deliver 1,000 of whatever produce you have, in maybe broccoli, for example, they trade it on your behalf. So if they don't sell anything, you don't get anything in return. And a lot of it sometimes does go to waste. So it becomes a bit ambiguous as to what your revenue could possibly look like from month to month. Next slide, please. In wholesale markets, these are just some examples of the big wholesale producers or wholesale supply companies in Maritzburg and Durban who are sort of like the link between the farm and the retail market. They would obviously have their logistics to be able to take stock in bulk and supply various retails. And they obviously make their income from a market or markup on the products that they buy or farm. Next slide. Just these are some of the pictures that I've taken on the farm of the produce that we, can you just go, of produce that we have on the farm. Okay, we can just jump to the next one. And then retail market, this is just a list of the stores or the way in which we were able to come into the retail space. We obviously started off with the sparse stores because The SPA stores, unlike your typical franchise, are quite unique. Each and every SPA is unique, and I think is managed and run differently from the next one. So if you have a great relationship with the fresh produce buyer of a particular department or SPA, you're able to sort of negotiate a way of supplying, sorry about that. Sorry, a way of supplying produce on a weekly basis. The problem with retail stores, one, sometimes the volumes that they can consume or sell in a week are too small compared to the amount of produce that you have to supply. ShopRite stores are a chain store, and they are not really a franchise, but more a company that we supply. And moving from SPAR stores, we were able to move to supplying ShopRite stores, where you find that there are quite a higher number of these stores around the region. But we also ran into some challenges with supplying stores individually, because if you are given 20 stores to supply in a particular region, they all want to get their produce at exactly the same time. Everyone wants to have their produce in store by 7, 8 in the morning before their doors open at 9. And unfortunately, being a small scale or upcoming farmer or farming business, you don't always have the logistics as part of the infrastructure or the equipment available to you on the farm, and it makes it very challenging to be able to get to these stores on time, and that can jeopardize the working relationship. But with much consistency and obviously growth and dynamic thinking, and obviously making changes to the way in which we operate, we then managed to eventually get into the distribution center, which has been the biggest breakthrough for our farm. And I always say we're a small scale simply because as much as we may be producing in large numbers, you find that you are still probably the smallest guy in the food chain. And when you're doing 30,000 cabbages per hectare over 90 days, so over 3 months, you find that there's a farmer, a very well-established farmer, who could be doing 120,000 at a single time, who's often your competition in the marketplace. So when we eventually grew to be able to just provide our produce to the distribution center, it changed the whole landscape of our business in a sense. Yeah, next slide, please. And those are just some pictures of taken off of the farm once again, and at the distribution center where our produce is delivered on a weekly basis. We can take the next slide. And then we are all we all have an end goal of obviously being able to produce and supply our produce outside the country, as I mentioned before. But obviously, there are products that are more inclined to be exportable in a sense. And these are just some of the typical examples that come from our region of KZN and Pietermaritzburg specifically, that I have had a great example of seeing are from neighboring farms of produce that has been exported outside of the country. Next slide, please. So I believe that a lot that contributes to the success of small scale farmers obviously is, first of all, consistency. And often when I speak of consistency, I'm not necessarily saying that you should be able to stick to doing the same thing all the time. There's obviously some dynamic thinking that you need to apply to stay ahead, and obviously to also just take away all of the risk of putting your eggs in one basket in a sense. But it's really important to remain consistent. So, you will go through some challenges on the farm. You will sometimes lose produce. You will go through droughts. You will go through pest-related challenges. But the biggest thing is how you come back from those challenges, and you must have a willingness to go back and try again. Sustainability, as I mentioned before, looking after your natural resources and your environment is highly important, because that's the one thing that is going to ensure that you're able to give it a go in the next season. Looking at growth, a lot of young small scale farmers tend to have they have a tendency to not reinvest in their operations or their production. So they will they will obviously have a good season. Or after the good season, they'll try and go back and remain at the same scale that they were at in the previous season. Whereas that would have been an opportunity for you to be able to double your production. So there's a high importance in growth when it comes to farming and reinvesting in whatever it is that you are doing. And then obviously looking out for opportunities that are available once you're at a scale or a level where you can go knocking on doors, looking into government to see if there are certain things that you can get assistance with. And I always say, it's not about looking for the big things. It's not about looking for the funding, which obviously is a challenge when it comes to, wanting to stabilize your operation or your business. But sometimes making use of the very small things that are available. For example, when it comes to government, I was quite surprised a year ago to learn that because they have transport available in your local, say your local agricultural office, they have all of the transport available in a driver who's hired, who's always there and available to assist people of the public who are in farming for as long as they are able to in advance apply for that kind of service. So, and that can make a very big difference, especially if you do not own a truck or if you don't own transport or a tractor. Think there are there is some equipment and services that you can make use of in your local government so that you're able to sort of start to stabilize your business. Thank you. Next slide. So there are a lot of challenges facing small scale farmers. This one was specifically lots of challenges facing the youth in general, but it's obviously skills, add skills in terms of being able to gauge the quality of your produce. Obviously being able to reach the quantities that are required at minimum in order for you to actually start to turn over and make a profit, and just the skill of scheduling your production so that you're able to always have something available for your market. And then the jobs in South Africa, we know job creation at the moment and availability of jobs for a lot of youth, especially qualified youth who have the skill to is obviously we are still lacking in that department. So with the difficulty of being able to hire a skilled workforce sometimes can be a bit of a challenge, and that can obviously slow down the growth and of your business. And then obviously for a lot of startups, the common challenges are land, infrastructure, finance, and markets. And above everything else, even when it comes to funding and finance, I always believe that without infrastructure, which happens to be very expensive and does need a lot of finance, but without infrastructure, it's highly unlikely that you will ever be able to reach your targets. Infrastructure is probably the most important element in any farming business. Next slide, please. And this is just an example of an article that I wrote on just being able to sync production with demand for vegetable production. Next slide, please. So there are various other skills that are quite important when it comes to trying to run a profitable farming business. Just over and above, having land, over and above having access to funding and obviously a market, but things like certification and skills that will assist you in being able to rope in and bring in a number of small scale farmers so that you don't have to necessarily entirely suffice an entire demand on your own. And obviously looking at various skills such as meat processing certificates, AFCASA, which is a certificate related to being able to manage pest-related diseases and challenges related to fungi on crops and that sort of thing, and as well as consulting. There's quite a lack of for mentorship and guidance and advice within this industry. A lot of people often have access to land, and yes, 9 times out of 10 you get there is communal land, but for as long as there's water available, and you are able to provide a service where you assist somebody through consultations. Right, next slide, please. I believe that partnerships are extremely important within the industry, simply because we stand a better chance of being able to share equipment, share infrastructure, and work together. We see this a lot in communities as well. So with people who can have a community that could have a head of 2,000 cattle, but all have a one dipping area within the community. But that kind of mentality employed in a formal business could still, again, set you apart and put you in a better position to supply. Next slide. Mentorship and support, as I mentioned regarding consultations as well, is one of the things that is lacking and is quite important in regards to the industry. Next slide. All right, this is just my last slide. I think I've covered everything that I wanted to cover regarding my sort of corner as a small scale farmer in KZN. Thank you.
Wow, very insightful, Mr. Ngobo. Thank you so much for your presentation. We're running a bit behind schedule, so we'll have to swiftly jump to the third presenter, and then we'll have questions right after he finishes. Mr. Wanga, take it away, please.
Good morning, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Wanga Kakaza, Operations Manager of Agribiotech and Managing Director of Wanga's Juice. At Agribiotech, I'm not sure whether you are hearing me like clearly because we are currently having some heavy rains here at this moment. At Agribiotech, it was established in 2017 to assist in terms of development of agripreneurs. So basically, it was established to nurture, mentor, train, and incubate agripreneurs in the value adding of biological resources. So basically, what do we do with Agribiotech? It's we send up calls for people that are interested in going for value adding product. Then we will take them through a process of business training whereby we'll offer them entry level for new venture creation, whereby we will educate them about identifying business viability, how do you determine cost of products that you are going to be doing. Then through all that processes, then whenever a person managed to pass that, and he will go to another phase of us, which is going to be an incubation phase, whereby we'll assist that person in terms of developing that product, scaling up. In the first year, the person has to come up with a prototype of the business. Then from the first year going to the second year, whereby you assist that person to grow in terms of that business venture he will be doing. Currently, we are looking for business opportunities or ideas that have a biological resource. The purpose of us looking for businesses that are having a biological in their manufacturing is through the process, so that we'll be able to assign our contract growers for that particular businesses. So because now we have noticed that and even this was another thing that was noted by Farmers Weekly, that in Africa as a whole, a large proportion of produce come from small scale farmers. Then from those small scale farmers and subsistence farmers, of which now if we manage to group them together, or they manage to produce for other value adding companies, which they can be able to generate income that can be able to sustain them. Then as time goes on, then they can be able to move up the scale, as Mr. Ngobo has indicated, how other businesses can upscale their produce. Then basically the funding that we do all these incubation and the training basically source from the private sector. It's the private sector that give us the money to be able to run all these projects, all these to assist these enterprises to develop. Currently, we are having about 12 enterprises that we are assisting in terms of their business development, of which four of those of the 12 enterprises are co-ops, which are basically based in Bizana in the Eastern Cape. Of those 4 co-ops, 3 of them are primary and 1 is the processing co-ops. Then whereas the 8 other like enterprises are based in Kokstad, as we are based in Kokstad. And all these enterprises, they are focusing on different plant material that they are looking, and more especially also we want to tap more into the indigenous plants. So there are some enterprises that are making their products using the indigenous plants that are found within the regions that they are doing their enterprises. In terms of like looking at those, we assist these enterprises in terms of developing them, their product, taking them through the process of how do you need to develop your product. Then how can we assist you? Then we assist them in terms of identifying their potential markets that they would be able to sell their product to. Then also we go to farmers market so that they can be able to show in their product they are doing, then displaying them. Then now, because of all those enterprises, now the next year will be looking in terms of getting the contract drawers for all those enterprises, so that their raw produce that they are using in terms of their processes, then they must purchase directly from the small farmers. Then currently we are having a database that we'll be selecting to, because of there is another company that we are working close with, which is Scientific Roots, which offers the accredited trainings, agricultural trainings, of which now they have all the list of the people that they have trained in the previous years. So now we managed to collect all that information together, and other people have indicated their interest in terms of becoming the contract growers of the enterprises that are currently having in agribiotech. So now next year we'll be looking in terms of taking those enterprises, in terms of taking those small farmers into agribiotech, so that they can start producing the raw produce for these entrepreneurs. Then also what we are going to do in terms of assisting the contract growers or the smallholder farmers, we will supply them with every agricultural input that they will need in order for them to kickstart their production. So that we are trying to reduce, because of we have noticed that for small scale farmers, sometimes it's difficult to get the inputs that they will be requiring, also other things. So now we want to reduce that. Then with the sole papers, that immediately they start selling their produce to these entrepreneurs. Then then it's when we'll start to say, okay, because of this is the inputs that we have supplied you, then we can manage now to say, okay, give us this so that we can always reinvest again to you. We will not only assist these, we are not only assisting will not only be assisting, also assisting these contract growers. Also, we are assisting them in terms of the infrastructure, so that they will be able to produce. In terms of this infrastructure, it varies depending on each and every smallholder farmers that we'll be working with. What kind of infrastructure does she or they need to be in place for us to be able to assist them in terms of scaling up and in terms of scaling, also in improving their production that they are doing. Then that is all about agribiotech and how and what do we or what we are doing. Then
Apologies for that. It seems as if we have lost Mr. Wanga. So I think we can now move into the second part of our webinar, which is the Q&A session. And my very first question goes out to Mr. Roger Takoldu. So, sir, in your opinion, what role does the government play in promoting and supporting entrepreneurship and farming?
Thanks. Thank you for that, Sia. The role that government plays in supporting, government plays a critical role as it provides one legislation for how businesses to start, but secondly, in terms of its various support programs, from an agricultural point of view, it's got its own developmental programs, focusing on subsistence farming, smallholder farming, and then as well as commercial, but commercial to especially medium scale. So there is various methodologies that government use to support that. And the second part, that is something that's very important, that government also use. You're also looking at business registration, or the CIPC. You're looking at SARS. You're looking at, so the government has a role to play, a very important role. But remember, government is also not there to start businesses. It's individuals that start businesses, and government support those individuals that starts the business. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. Another follow-up question. Are there any structures or institutions that promote the awareness of new developing niches in agriculture? For example, your aqua farming.
So yes, when it comes to aqua farming, fish farming, that type of thing, what used to happen is, before the current administration, the department used to be called the Department of Agriculture, Forestry and Fisheries. But the Forestry and Fisheries file has been moved to the environmental part, so they under Minister Barbara Creasy. And so we are Department of Agriculture, Land Reform and Rural Development. But yes, there is structures, especially in terms of aquaculture, and aqua farming, inland fishing. So your inland fish farming is mainly done in streams and in rivers. So yes, they have dedicated structures. I could put you in contact, or the department could put you in contact with Mr. Belamani Selemoli, who is actually the lead, and they have dedicated structures where they actually advise people and how to get into especially aquaculture. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Now I'll be moving on to Mr. Ngobo. So, Mr. Ngobo, do you struggle with yield sometimes? And if so, are there any contingency plans for a specific buyer? And as we all know that we've all been struggling with the COVID-19 pandemic. And I just would like to know, how has that affected your productivity, your yield and turnover for the fiscal year of 2020?
Thank you, Sia. So first of all, funny enough, we do struggle with yield, both in positive and a negative way. Obviously, the negative way being sometimes we do go through issues like, for example, myself 2 weeks ago, we got hit by hail, most unexpectedly, of course. And by getting hit by hail, obviously that affects our December income as a whole. And we sort of been lucky enough to see some recoveries here and there, but that's obviously unforeseen situations. And obviously, when you've had a good 2-3 years running good seasons in production, insurance of crops is the last thing on your mind. You always look at it as a luxury expense until situations such as this. But it's also quite uncommon to sort of insure fresh produce more than it would be to insure your extensive crops, things like your maize, soyas, wheat, that sort of thing that are planted over hectares and hectares and hectares. And then on the adverse side, struggling with yield could also mean that sometimes you have an oversupply of whatever it is that you've got in the field. So if you plant 100,000 cabbages in a season, you find that you struggle to sell them all off before some of them actually have to be plowed back into the soil because you just have so much. And COVID-19 has affected a lot of businesses. It has affected farming, be it whether you are an essential worker or not. You find that the change in sort of policies and in certain things like the human resource aspect of the farming business. So, your employment conditions have changed. People having to social distance on the farm in any business. So it's very tough, especially if it requires a lot of like physical work, you've got to pass something on to somebody else. But obviously, it's just the situation of obviously having the correct PPE for them to use at all times, making sure that over and above their working conditions, you've also, we work with a lot of underskilled people, and they go back to informal settlements in a sense, and even there, you could protect them as much as you want at work, but what happens beyond the borders of the farm can be quite challenging. So you've also got to create a lot of awareness around why it's important to constantly wash your hands, to sanitize, to wear a mask, to social distance, and to just get them to understand all the time that these things are important, not only at work, but even back at home, so that they don't bring it back to the working environment. But I must say we've been very fortunate not to have a single case of COVID during our time this year. In terms of staff, we had no staff falling sick or having to be off at home. So I guess it is manageable if you pay attention and you do it right.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ngobo. Now I'll be moving on to Mr. Kakaza. So, Mr. Kakaza, do you think an educational background in agriculture is an important and necessary aspect when one wants to start up in farming?
Thank you, Mr. Zia. I think it's very important that someone have an educational background in agriculture, because agriculture it's agriculture, but agriculture is a science. There are a lot of things that are involved in it, that activities, and at some point in time with knowledge and have the experience, but also now you also need an education around your experience and knowledge in order. I'm not sure whether you are still hearing me.
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, no, it's because of, as I've stated earlier on, we're having some problems of rain and hail on this side. So I'm not sure whether I'm just cut short. Then with all that background, but at some point in time, you need to always update yourself, as you know, because we said agriculture is a science, it's always changing and it's always evolving. So now it's important for someone to always try to catch up with the new technology and the new development that are coming up. So education plays, a background in agriculture plays an important role, especially if you want to scale up and improve your agricultural practice.
Thank you so much, Mr. Kakaza. So now we'll be taking questions from the audience. First question. I am a 17-year-old and want to begin farming career just after matric. How do I start farming, and where can I get additional advice and information from? So I think Mr. Ngobo will be in a better position to answer this. So I'm directing the question to you, sir.
Okay, so 17 and in the trick. So the question now becomes, what subjects are you currently doing? I mean, obviously, farming is a very hands-on, skill-related industry. Somebody can learn particular skills suited to whatever it is that they want to do. but you can also pursue quite a lot of tertiary education around farming, starting all the way up from a BSc in agriculture in various streams to a BVS if you want to get into veterinary science, to agricultural economics if you want to deal with the numbers, right down to diploma and even a certificate in the various faculties of agriculture. So we are lucky enough to have agriculture, and there are, I think, 9 in South Africa. Owen Sitole, I know that there's one in Mpumalanga, I think, or Eastern Cape, Grootfontein, a couple in Mpumalanga, Tolo, South in Cape Town. So you just need to do your research regarding agricultural colleges, which is where you're probably going to find a very good blend of theoretical and practical experience and knowledge regarding agriculture. So please do Google and look for look at your agricultural colleges.
Thank you so much. There's a comment addressing just that. So the comment reads, if you are unable to take the route of formal education, which can be done through colleges of agriculture amongst other institutions, it is advisable that you visit the AgriCETA website and look at the accredited providers where you can acquire training on your specific area of interest, such as a course on vegetable production. Sorry, I was muted there for a second. I have a question for Mr. Ngobo. So you're very popular on Instagram and Twitter as well. So I would like to know, how effective is social media presence when it comes to the reach of your company to retail partners as well as the general public?
That is a very interesting, very interesting comment right there. Simply because I remember I was way in ahead of my industry when I came into the space, and I thought, in the first month I was going to do all the supply informal markets, and then eventually just by June I should be hitting these retail stores like nothing. To apply at ShopRite actually for the first time. And first of all, they serve you with a massive lever arch file of documents that you actually need to fill in and comply with. Other the certification like GAP and that sort of thing actually require quite a lot of money just to get the farm ready for certification. So for you need to get the farm ready with the correct infrastructure for the assessment, and that's before you've even paid for anything else. So yeah, it was a bit of a discouraging thing to realize that it's actually not just a walk in the park. You don't just knock on the door, walk in and supply. But funny enough, after posting a lot of the content of what I do on social media, it eventually got the attention of quite a reputable publication, being the Farmers Weekly, especially for a lot of us who are in the industry. And not just the article, but making the cover page raised quite a lot of awareness of myself and the farming business back here in KZN. And eventually the call, funny enough, came from the retail back to my side, asking if I would appreciate an opportunity to be able to supply through to retail. So the reach of social media eventually made its round all the way to why I was able to, or lucky enough at such a premature stage, to be able to experience the retail market supply.
Thank you so much. So this question goes out to the whole panel. Considering the effects of COVID-19 and how it tipped the balance of how we do things, do you think that farmers should align themselves with the fourth industrial revolution and trying to to cut or minimize the dependency on human resources? This one's open to the whole panel.
Okay, I thought maybe Mr. Tackle Dude wanted to go first. But in the farming industry, I believe that way ahead of just the COVID-19 situation, a lot of conversation was around the fourth industrial revolution in terms of production, simply because you are trying to, first of all, gain quite a lot of efficiency. You're trying to minimize a lot of guesswork, and you're trying to just stay ahead in terms of becoming more efficient in ways of producing in order to increase scale. I think that besides the cost of fuel on any farm, the biggest cost actually will be labor, you know. And as much as we are very keen on contributing towards job creation in our country, it's quite difficult to do that for a number of people who are, especially as a farmer and a farm owner, you're governed by policies, obviously, that require a minimum wage, you know, that must be paid out to it. Almost like manufacturing, you actually need like a huge staff complement in order for you to be able to sort of run the farming business. And I mean, unlike finished goods that you get from a manufacturing plant that are worth a primary sector, which means that a lot of our raw products are obviously going to be sold at bare minimum prices. It just obviously makes sense to just start, the farm gate price will always be quite low. So to the number of volumes you have to push in order just to cover your costs, it can get quite tricky. So obviously the 4IR situation started coming through then, you know, looking at things like pack housing, conveyor belt systems, and not having people having to load certain things. We have come to a point where tractors can plant hectares and hectares of land by just putting the GPS coordinates of the area on your iPad and linking it to your tractor, and the tractor driving itself. So the conversation has been ongoing way beyond COVID-19.
Mr. Takoldu?
Yes, I think from my side, I'm to use an agricultural joke. I'm not going to overgraze on what Sia said. Not overgrazing, but you have to look at it. There's different contexts. Yes, you need to bring on 4IR. You need to bring on innovation, and innovation is not only technology. So yes, you have to bring on technological innovation. That is important. But what is the context in what South African agriculture finds itself? So South African agriculture finds itself also in a policy space where we have quite a labor dispensation. These are the policies that makes up our country, and the labor policy of our country. Not forgetting some of the history behind the what the labor market has played, or the labor force has played in the democratization of our country. So that is important to just to keep in the back of your mind. So yes, you cannot forget about 4IR. The fourth industrial revolution, yes, but there is just then certain aspects that needs to be on board. Take for instance this afternoon, Sipe over there is having bandwidth problems. That is a challenge if you are moving agriculture into four. Wanga's having problems, is just raining and hailing. And then, yeah, you're having problems. So those small issues need to be sorted out, because, yes, in South Africa, I mean, we 2018 at the NAMPO, the national, you know, the NAMPO Oesdag that gets kept in the Free State or Northwest Province. They sold the self-driving tractors, the one that CP was talking about, where you can actually lay in your bed and have a cup of coffee, put in the GPS coordinates from your cell phone, not even the iPad, from your cell phone, and it leaves the track, it leaves the garage, goes into the field, plows, plants. By the end of the day, it has plowed, planted everything, and you are still laying in bed, having a cup, and parked itself back in the garage. In certain industries, yes, You can bring in technological advancement, but like your maize industry, because it's fairly cut and dry, and you can minimize the labor force. But do we want to minimize the labor force if we have so many people to feed? Um, in the fruit industry, you cannot go and pick apples with a track or with a machine, because the machine is not as soft unless you're going to create a very soft machine that feels like a human hand. Because if you're exporting fruit or anything, those things play fundamental roles, is the indentations in the fruit. So the human hand, no matter if it's even it's calloused a bit, it's very soft. It's going to take a lot of technological advancement to get it to there. So yes, there's always research going on. Yes, but at the same time, when you bring upon 4IR and you're moving away from a labor dispensation, what do you do with that labor? Because if you just leave the people there, it's going to cause a revolt. As a policy thinker, I always have to think of the good and the bad. And that is why I think so. You have to upskill your labor. You have to upskill the labor. So they might not be part in the production value chain. Maybe they move into a factory setting. You start upskilling them. They become part of now your labor force in terms of your sales, where you send them out, or you teach them other skills where they also become farmers, and they supply into you, supplying your business. So there's many. So what for IR comes as well as upskilling of the human being, because if the human being is left behind, you're going to have serious challenges. So yes, we need to go for it. We need to go for it, but we need to find the balance for South African agriculture, and yet that same balance must give us a competitive advantage if we take our produce outside of the country and to compete at the international level. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Takudu. We'll now move on to Mr. Wanga. Do you have any thoughts on the subject?
On my side, I think they've just captured all like what I was about to say. I was like, in as much as like we have all these sort of technologies, because of if you look even outside South Africa, you find that they're having robots that can look after like the cattle, also sheep, but we will be sitting there. But within us, we need to find a balance between the fourth industrial revolution and the labor force that we have. So in as much as we need it, but we should find that balance between the two.
Thank you so much, Mr. Kakaza. I see that the word of the day is upskilling as well as education, and I hope our viewers have heard. We have unfortunately ran out of time. We have come to the end of our session. I would like to know if any of you guys have any last words for our viewers. Mr. Takudu?
From my side, thank you very much. Thank you for affording me this opportunity to be a panelist and to be part of it. If you have, if there's anybody out there that still has any more questions, maybe through you can forward it to the department. You have your contact in the department, and we'll direct it if there's anything else that we could assist with. Then lastly, from my side, more to your subsistence farmers or your household farmers, let me take this opportunity. The department, through the Presidential Economic Stimulus Initiative, we are running a small initiative whereby for household producers, for household consumption, or Mam Dlamini or Mam Gobo is there in the rural village that has the chickens, that grants and plants and maize, where we are running a specific program for and we're going to give out vouchers to them, but they have to apply for it, and it's an online. We're actually trying the full 4IR thing, so the application is not going to be done manually. It's going to be done electronically. So there is a code. I just want to give you that code, because you can just do it from your phone actually, and people can apply sitting in the comfort of their home, looking at COVID. So the code is the USSD code to dial is *134*4536#, and that will take you to and you don't need airtime, you don't need to be subscribed. I'm reading the message here. Remember, it's free, no need airtime, no use. So the department is covering that charge, and then we will, and that's for household producers. And there's an ad also goes, so we're giving from 1,000 to 9,000. 9,000 is the limit. We are essentially promoting females and youth. That is what we want, but especially for your household, and college can just go onto the department's website. So we're just promoting. I'm part of the PESI project, or Presidential Economics, within the department. So thank you for this opportunity, and for the free marketing. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Takodu. I hope the household producers are going to heed your call. And now we move on to Mr. Andile Ngobo. Sir, take it away.
Yeah, well, I think it's just to obviously say thank you so much to the team at SciFest, obviously, for the platform to be able to share my story, my view. And yeah, I hope that a lot of the young people in South Africa are obviously going to look at and explore options beyond farming in the primary sector, but look at going and um, getting involved in other technical aspects of agriculture, as well as other parts of the business, like agricultural logistics, that sort of thing. You know, these are very important aspects that are not readily available to us as farmers, especially not a lot of them owned by young Black businesses. So do really look into being a little bit innovative in terms of your choices when it comes to business in general. And with that, thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. A lot of people have been asking for your contact. I hope you will be leaving it with us so that they can contact you regarding all that you've talked about today. So we'll swiftly move on to Mr. Wanga Kakaza to say his last words.
Okay, no, thank you very much. I should like to take for the opportunity that you have given me, also like all the people that managed to come and listen to our stories from the different part of the world that we are in. Also the knowledge that we have learned from each other. As you know, in Xhosa, we normally say, "Intaka yakha ngoboya benye." So with all the information that we managed to share, there's something that you are going to go home and you go and look at it. I hope, like with everyone that have that managed to get in, also they managed to grab some smaller nyana things for themselves that they can just go home and do their homework.
Thank you so much, sir. So, on behalf of the Grahamstown Foundation, SciFest Africa, and the National Arts Festival, we would like to thank you, gentlemen, for taking out time off your busy schedules to come and join us for a very fruitful, interactive, and engaging session. I would also like to thank our tech team for ensuring a smooth and fluid webinar, and our audience as well for engaging in today's topic. Enjoy the rest of the day, guys. From me, Siaka Kolisi, I say goodbye.
Bye-bye. Cheers, everybody. Keep well. Stay safe.
Thanks a lot, guys. Cheers.